Welcome back. We are more than halfway finished now with chapter 11, which is awesome. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into 11.6, which is comparing fractions on a number line. To recap, we've already compared fractions just as through pictures. We have already compared fractions with the same numerator, and we've compared fractions with the same denominator. Today, we're going to compare both those types of fractions, same numerator and denominator, but we're going to do it using a numbered line. So starting on page 513, it says, use fraction strips to plot each fraction on the numbered line and then circle the greater fraction. Well, I don't have fraction strips, so I'm just going to do my best to draw my number line like we did in chapter 10. So I've got a number line here. And looking at your book, it gives you 0 and 1. And the fractions we are comparing are 2/8 and 7/8, okay? Now you might look at it and already know which is the greater fraction, but we're still going to plot it on the number line, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and make out my 8. So I've got 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8 or 1/2, 5/8, 6/8, and 7/8. Okay, so now I'm going to plot. Plotting, if you remember, is just drawing in one filled circle over the fraction or number that we're plotting. So we're going to plot 2/8, just right there, and 7/8. And I need to circle the greater fraction. Well, looking at my number line, 7/8 is closer to 1 whole than 2/8 is. So 7/8 is my greater fraction. When you're looking down at the constructing arguments, it says, tell your partner how to use a number line to compare fractions. The fractions they give us there are 1/7 compared to 3/7. Well, just like we just did, we can plot both 1/7 and 3/7 on the same number line. Both have the same denominator. Since 3/7 is to the right of 1/7, so just like 7/8 is to the right of 2/8, 3/7 would be your greater fraction. So let's turn the page on 514, and it says, on a number line, fractions to the left are less than the fractions to the right. Fractions to the right are greater than the fractions to the left. So the example, it gives us where we are comparing 3/4 and 1/4. So since both have the same denominator, we can put them on the same number line. Okay, so we've got 1 whole and 0, and we have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, not the most even. And if I put a plot on 1/4 and put a plot on 3/4, it says 3/4 is to the blank. So 3/4 is to the right of 1/4. So that would mean that 3/4 is greater than 1/4. So now, if we're looking at that, and those are the fractions with the same denominator, we're now going to try the next example where the fractions have the same numerator. Remember, with the numerator, it's a little more tricky than it was if fractions were the same denominator because you can just compare the numerators. Well, it's a little different with the same numerator. So we now have 2 number lines, okay, for our 2 different fractions. We are comparing 2/8. 2/8 is to the blank. So we'll have 2/8 compared to 2/3. So if you look, our numerators are the same, but our denominators are not. So on that top line, since it gives me 2/8 first, that's where I'm going to use my eighths. So I will go ahead and measure out my eighths. Four eighths. An 8/8 or 1 whole. And then the bottom number line, we will use our thirds. We've got 0/3, 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3. Okay? So now that I have that, I'm going to plot, and I need to plot both of them. Okay, so if I'm plotting my 2/8, I'm looking right here. And plotting 2/3, I'm right here. So now I need to look at both of them simultaneously, okay? So I need to look at both of them at the same time. So 2/8 is to the left of 2/3, which would mean that 2/8 is less than 2/3, okay? So looking at the show and grows, number 1 through 4, it is the same. You're given a couple different examples to look at. So it looks like it already gives you the number line. So for number 1, you need to plot 5/6 and 4/6. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And 1 whole. This is 0. Okay. So I'm going to use a different color to help you see. 5/6 right there. 4/6 right there. 5/6 compared to 4/6. Well, if you look, 5/6 is closer to the 1 whole. 5/6 is greater than 4/6. Okay? So looking at number 2, you really just need to put your plot point. Well, 1/2 and 2/4 share the same tick mark. So 1/2 and 2/4 are equal. Okay? And then looking at 3 and 4, they split it up again with two different number lines. So like number 4, you're going to need to look where is 4/6 plotted compared to 4/4, and then you'll decide which fraction is larger by looking at those. So looking at 5 through 10, it just gives you the fraction. No number line to help you plot or solve. So looking at number 5, we have 1/2 compared to 1/3. This is just like what we did in 11.4 and 11.5. Well, they've got the same numerator. Okay, so now I need to compare the denominators. And I know the smaller the denominator means the larger fraction. So just as an example, I drew 2 circles. And if I shade in 1/2 of this circle compared to 1/3 of this circle, which circle has the greater fraction? 1/2. Okay? Let's also look at, how about number 10, where we are looking at the same denominator. So we've got 1/6 compared to 2/6. If you remember, the same denominator means all you need to do is compare the numerator. Since I know that the number 1 is less than the number 2, 1/6 is less than 2/6. So looking at 11 and 12, for number 11, we are to write a fraction that is greater than 5/6. That can be anything. So you can say 6/6, you can get into 7/8, any fraction that is greater than 5/6. Have fun with it, okay? And then for number 12, you're writing any fraction that is less than 3/4. Same thing, they can share the same numerator, they can share the same denominator, as long as it is less than 3/4. Looking at number 13, Newton buys 1/4 of a pound of cheese. Descartes buys 3/4 of a pound of cheese. Who buys more cheese? Well, we've got the same denominator, so I'm just going to compare 1/4 of a pound to 3/4 of a pound. 3/4 is the greater fraction, which means Descartes buys more cheese. Okay? For number 14, you need to choose which fractions, because there is more than one, are greater than 2/4. Now you have some options with the same denominator, so again, you're just comparing the numerators. And then you're going to have to do a little bit of work and figure out, is 2/3 or 2/6 and 1/2 greater than 2/4, okay? And the key word there is greater than, not greater than and equal to, just greater than. So keep that in mind. All right, let's move on to 516. And we're going to do the model example up at the top. And it says, does the recipe call for more salt or more pepper? So I'm looking at the recipe there on 516, and we have two different models, so two different number lines. So my first thought right then is I'm not going to have the same denominator. So my blue is going to be the salt, and it looks like we need 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to write 1/2 teaspoon. So just by knowing I need to plot 1/2, I need to divide my number line into 2 equal shares. So I've got 1/2 teaspoon, and I'll plot that point right there. Okay, so that's salt. And then I'll do a green number line for pepper. And it looks like we need 1/4 teaspoon. So that means I need to divide into 4 equal shares. Okay, so I've got 2/4 there, 1/4 teaspoon, 3/4 teaspoon. I'm going to plot right here at 1/4. So 1/4 is to the left of the 1/2, okay? So the recipe is calling for more salt than pepper, so that's our first answer, is the recipe calls for more salt. When it's time to explain, they want us to compare our fractions, so we'll have 1/2 compared to 1/4. Is 1/2 greater than or less than 1/4? It is greater than. Okay, so looking at 15, you need to do the same thing. You're going to look at the Creole sauce or seasoning compared to lemon juice. So what I would recommend is using your 2 number lines to determine which one you use more of. 16, you need to decide whose fish is shorter, you or your friends. And those both have the same denominator. And then 17 is a little tricky because you are eating 4/8 of a quesadilla and your friend eats 2/8 of a different quesadilla. Can you tell who ate more and explain? So you're going to have to think, if I'm eating a quesadilla and you're eating a different quesadilla, would we be able to tell who ate more? Maybe, maybe not. Think a little further. If I'm eating a quesadilla from Chipotle and you're eating a quesadilla from Taco Bell, are they the same size? If they're not the same size, are we going to know who ate more? So that's a little bit of a dig deeper for you. All right, so you just really have to pay attention. Same numerator, same denominator, and compare your fractions. And best of luck. Come back here for 11.7.